wondering, the choir want to sit down here so that they can, I don't know, see me better, and I can see them better. It stops a lot of this going on. So, in case anyone was wondering what they're doing, we started it for my taped reflections for school, and they really like it, so we're letting them sit down there now. But not until they're finished working, which means after the anthem. So, we are in our second week of the Gospel of Mark. We're going to be, as I say, Mark is the Gospel that we focus on this year. It's a fast Gospel. There's not a lot. There's only 16 chapters, and they move really fast. And so here we have, Jesus has called only four disciples at this point, James, John, Andrew, and Peter. And he goes with them to the synagogue in Capernaum. And in very Markan style, we hear right away what it is that Jesus has come to do. In fact, Mark mentions it 4 times what Jesus is there to do. He's there to teach. Mark, as a whole gospel, is deeply concerned that people understand that Jesus is amongst the people to teach them. To teach them, and through his teachings, heal them. And in his teaching, to bring them to a new understanding of their relationship with God. It is rather unfortunate, actually, that the translators of the original Greek into the New Revised Standard Version, which is the version we use here, use the term an unclean spirit. For if the person who was indeed possessed by an unclean spirit, they would not be allowed to be in the synagogue and among the people. Remembering the Jewish, back then, the very strong rules that the Jewish temple cult had around people who were considered unclean. But this person recognizes who Jesus is when he's speaking and teaching in the synagogue. This person recognizes who Jesus is and calls him the Holy One. And Jesus, in response, says, "Be silent." Which is a very common thing in Mark. There's a lot of times in the Gospel of Mark when those who actually figure it out, who figure out who Jesus is, are told to be quiet, to hold their silence. Now, Mark has also a really important piece for us in this, in that Jesus has 3 places where he teaches, and they're all significant for us. One is in the place of the religious activity, so the synagogue and the temple. The next one is in the home. We'll hear Jesus teaching in the homes. And then there will be Jesus' public teaching. So when he's preaching out in the fields and on the mountainsides and stuff. That's the 3 places where Jesus holds his places of teaching. The first one is in the synagogue, the place of the religious. Jesus, in that, has come to challenge the religious authority of his time and place. It's kind of, as a preacher and as a religious leader, it's a bit uncomfortable having Jesus come in to the synagogue and challenge. I mean, really, what kind of qualifications does this boy have? He did not go to Vancouver School of Theology. He's not in the alumni list. I looked. He didn't go to Duke in the US. He didn't go to Cambridge in the UK. He has no formal teaching. How dare he come in and challenge? How dare he come into this religious place and challenge us? But he does. He steps into the midst of our religious life and he challenges us. And I think the questions he asks us are really important. They're important questions as we head into next week. They're very important as we head into next week. Because Jesus is going to spend his time challenging us around certain things. He's going to ask us, questions around, is what we do because we feel that it's our authority to do it? Do we have religious authority obsession? Are we doing what we do because we know we have power and authority? And not only to the official religious leaders, but to all of us as leaders. Are we doing what we do for the church because we like our authority and we like our power? And then he's going to ask us questions like, when you're doing that, are you doing it for the betterment of God's people as a whole? Or are you only worried about yourself? Is what you're doing in my name, in God's name, about God's people as a group? Or are you more worried about protecting? Are you worried about protecting individuals? Are you worried about protecting your little fiefdom? And then he's going to ask us questions about, is what you're doing going to bring forth the kingdom of God? Is it going to be part of the inbreaking of God's kingdom? Because remember, when Jesus begins in the Gospel of Mark, he talks about the fact that the kingdom is now but not yet here. It is both present because he is with us, but it's not yet at its fulfillment. So is what we are doing going to bring around or contribute to the fulfillment of the kingdom? And those are hard questions for us inside our protected religious space. Because, darn it, God, you're making us ask questions about ourselves. You're making us question how we behave, what we do, how we're reaching out, how we're engaging those who, well, don't belong to the club. You're asking us to look outside of our four walls at the man in the street or the woman who is sleeping in the shop front, or you're asking us to look at the child who isn't quite there and quite the same, who's questioning their gender identity, or you're asking us to look at the teenager who doesn't, well, conform to our ideas of what is acceptable. And you're asking us to ask questions around, is our expression of how we come to be people of faith faithful? You're asking us to think about how we worship together, how we study together, how we speak together, how we engage with one another. And that means that we're going to get really uncomfortable with each other, because you're asking us to look at ourselves first and foremost. And boy, we hate looking in that mirror, don't we? We'd much rather look at the other person and point at them and say that they have done me wrong and they are bullying me or they are picking on me. It's so much easier to do that than look at ourselves and say, these are my human traits, oh God. These are the things that pull me away from you. Pull me into an irreligious life. Pull me into a life not filled with spiritual well-being. That pull me into a life where I don't want to engage with the community of faith. Because it's just so much easier if I point the finger, or I sit by myself, or I don't ask or engage. When Mark has Jesus come into the synagogue, he begins Jesus' ministry with a blast. This is not an easy moment. And the man and the spirit know that. And they know that the power that Jesus has entered into the synagogue is a power that has not been seen before. It is a power that is beyond the ordinary power of those who are gathered there. This is a power that has been given by God. A power that is filled a man who has entered into a deep spiritual life, who knows that we're going to enter into uncomfortable territory, who knows that for us to enter into that uncomfortable territory with him, we are going to have to leave our nets behind and walk away and enter into something new, a new life, a new possibility. And that in that new life and new possibility, yes, there are things where we are going to mourn for and things that we are going to regret that we have had to let go, but we are going to have to let them go. For a voice of authority has called us out. A spirit greater than any individual or group has called us into a place where we must look at what ministry and mission we are called to be and do. A spirit has entered into our building and said, what is it that you're doing for God? How are you living out your life as a Christian? A spirit is entering into our building and saying, what is it that you would like the people to know about me? How are you reflecting my love into the world? And that's a hard thing for us to engage with. That's a difficult place for us to go. For we know that we will leave the security of our nets and the life we have known before, and we will follow this man, this beloved one. And he will take us places we do not want to go. He will take us onto mountainsides and speak to us in ways that will make us tremble. And he will take us to places where we will watch him and his words be crucified by those who know that the only way to get rid of him is to try and kill him off. But he will also take us to an empty tomb. He will take us to an empty tomb, and at that empty tomb we will see all kinds of possibilities. We will have our names called, and we will be spoken to as if we are the only one present. And we will stand at the empty tomb and realize that though we are filled with fear for what that new possibility might be, although we are filled with fear for it, we cannot keep silent. But rather, we need to go out and change the world. For we have been changed by that experience. We cannot keep silent. For we will hear our name called at the tomb. We will put our hands on the wounds. We will attempt to touch his robe, and he will be like fire, tongues of fire through our space. In Mark's opening of the gospel, we are being given a snapshot of what will be. There will be frenzy. There will be silencing. But there will be authority from Christ. And that authority will lead us. That authority will take us into new places. I wonder what the disciples' faces looked like when they saw this interaction. Here they were, they'd given it all up. And the only one who seems to recognize that Jesus is the Holy One is someone who's been called a possessed man. It takes the disciples a long time, and in fact, even when they recognize him, they don't always quite get it right. I wonder if that event hung with them, stayed with them. And I wonder when they saw the empty tomb, if they were reminded that at the very beginning of his ministry, there was a voice that said, "You are the Holy One."